And can I ask if everybody is fine if we upload this to YouTube? We need permission from the participants.
Yes,
Sure.
no problem.
Okay, everyone is good with it?
Why don't you ask if anybody is opposed to it, and then we can scan and see.
Is anybody opposed to it? No, okay. That was easier. You should be hosting here, Maxine.
Oh, you do a great job.
So I'm assuming everyone saw the poster. Some of us are familiar with Paul because he did visit our community a few years ago. So you know he's an author, he's an environmental columnist. He's published thousands of articles, 4 books. I have 2 of them here. The one he spoke about before was 11, and that's in our local library. And his most recent book is this, Man of the Trees. And I guess you might tell us a little bit about that, Paul. He's a recipient of the Canadian Environmental Award and the Meewasin Conservation Award. And most recently, his group received the Food System Vision 2050 prize from the Rockefeller Foundation, which is an example, as his books are, of a positive vision of the future. So I'll hand it over to Paul.
Well, thank you, Shelley. And it's nice to be back in Grand Forks, if only virtually. Since I was there last time, my wife and I moved to Molokai in Hawaii.
Oh, nice.
And we're hoping to be kind of part of the community here and see if we can help in any way with efforts for community development, sustainability, and so on. And we didn't come here because of the weather. However, we're okay with it never being winter.
Yeah.
No more shoveling snow. Maybe I'll be shuffling dirt, but anyway. So I was given this title, Where Do We Want Our World to Go? And I just saw this nice, I was at the National Gallery in Ottawa and I saw this beautiful Lauren Harris painting of this sort of quiet scene, and it seems very much like the world is not like that at all. And there's this, I talked a bit about this the last time I was there, was this concept of the world going from what you might call an empty world, a world that's, you know, typified by this nice country road. And actually where I am, there's little roads like this. But you know, we're talking about empty world, we're talking about a world empty of people and all of our stuff. And this is sort of our modern world, more and more, where it's full of people and our stuff. And so, you know, when we talk about where we want our world to go, we sort of have to talk about where it's at now and where it's heading. And then, you know, perhaps how we could can you see me okay or hear me?
Yeah, you're back now. Yeah.
Everything's still okay.
Oh,
So, so this movement from a full to an empty world is going through this process of population growth. And there's this really long period of time, 10,000 generations before we got to 1 billion people in the world. But then things really started to speed up, and it only took 6 more generations to hit 2 billion, and then 2 generations to hit 3 billion, and then less than 1 generation to hit 4 billion. So after that, it doesn't take long. We have more and more people. When I first wrote the book 11, there were, I think, 7.2 billion people in the world. That was 6 years ago, and now there's 600 million more people. So you can see from this graph that really it's just in the last period of time, the last 50 years or so, where the population has really gone crazy. But on top of that, there's all of these things that we have, this consumer revolution, all of the animals that we we manage 25 billion different animals in our agricultural system. All of these things basically filling up our world that used to be more or less empty of our stuff. So for example, we look at this image and we see the number of wild animals in the world. This is by weight. Let's say if you weighed all the animals in the world, all the people and all our livestock, the green squares are the wild animals. The dark squares are people and all of our livestock. So we're literally taking over the world. And then there's all our buildings, and all the heat and cooling and light. All this huge amount of energy to support all. We have to put into the world and extract more and more resources to support our civilization. And often this is a very destructive process. So today, I think, yeah, this slide was 7.7 billion the last time I did it, but now it's about 7.8 billion. And we're overshooting Earth's capacity to support us already by about 60%. So it takes the equivalent of about 1.6 Earths to support our present levels of consumption and emissions. But we're only just beginning. And if you look at this graph, you see how we're growing. When I was a kid in the 1950s, there were about 2.5 billion people. We've already tripled that, but we're heading towards 11 billion people. But along with that is our economy, the green line, moving from when I was a kid, maybe $6 or $7 trillion of present value, and moving towards more like $250 trillion. And then our ecological footprint, the sort of impact of all of that is the blue line. And as I mentioned, we're using today something like 1.6 Earths, and we would be moving towards using more like the equivalent of 5 planets. So obviously this doesn't work. And somehow we have to get back here, which is the last time, 1975, when we used 1 Earth equivalent. So we have to return to this footprint around that period of time. But we have to do it while we're still helping the poorest segments of the population to kind of raise up their standard of living. So today we have this idea of uneconomic growth. We talk about economic growth and how important it is, but today some of our growth is becoming uneconomic in that it produces more of what some people call ilth and wealth, and ilth is kind of like bad wealth. So we're having, as we produce more and more and we grow more and more, there's more and more economic damage that actually results from our activities in terms of natural disasters. And so as our economy grows, our natural capital, kind of all the resources, the renewable and non-renewable sources we have decline. And oddly enough, with all of this economic activity, the inequality in the world is actually growing. And wealth is being concentrated into fewer and fewer hands. So, and you know, studies have shown that inequality makes everything worse. So it's not just the poverty alone, but it's the big kind of difference between those who are rich and poor that causes a lot of problems. So this is an example of what happens when we have too much growth and too many impacts on the earth. We start to have all of these big, what they call loss events, hurricanes and so on, that big flash floods or droughts that cause great deal of damage. So 2015, we went to over 1,000 of these major loss events for the first time in history. And in this case, the people who are hurt the most are the poor from floods and droughts and so on. So our whole civilization is, in a sense, environmental scientists are saying, is endangered. And these is just a graph of all the different kind of areas of crisis that are affecting the world. And so it's not a very good story. Now, one of the possibilities that I talk about in my book 11 is that actually we're in a process of transformation of civilization. So there's a sort of forces of disintegration which are working to break down the kind of foundations of civilization. But there's other processes in place that are processes of integration, which are starting kind of in the background to build a new kind of order in the world. And this is one of the great scientists, Edward O. Wilson, the great biologist, and he talks about this being an unprecedented time in human history when we have the capability for the first time in history to achieve our greatest goal, which is the unity of the human race. And the potential to turn Earth into a paradise by the end of the present century, he said. And he's, of course, one of the great environmental critics in the world, but he still sees this, humanity has this potential to work together. But to do that, we need really a type of change that is more transformational. It's a change on an unprecedented scale. We really need to reshape our culture, to reshape our agriculture, and in a sense, to become a new kind of human race. So is that kind of change possible? And if so, how do we transform ourselves? Well, I think it's becoming more and more clear that a political approach is really not a go. It's not really adequate to make the kind of changes we need. So what else can we do? It's interesting that in any complex system, there's this, scientists have observed this 4-stage process, which they call the panarchy model, which shows how societies go through this stage of building up their capital and then eventually collapsing and reorganizing. And any kind of complex system, whether it's an ecosystem or human system, goes through these changes. So it's kind of an indication that there's a potential to bring about change. And we actually are seeing these changes happening all over the world in small ways. We're seeing, for example, urban areas transforming. I love this picture of these buildings that become like a forest. People are responding to this situation in some positive ways. And people are changing from being consumers to prosumers. And they're building sustainable cities, cities that are carbon neutral, or neighborhoods in some parts of the world. People are starting to produce food on a large scale in urban areas. There are many urban farmers gardening. So there are these interesting movements that are underway that are kind of small compared to the destructive movements, but are encouraging if you kind of start to investigate what's really happening. Renewable energy, and there's more money going into developing renewable sources of energy than the older polluting sources. And whole countries are changing their energy systems, such as Germany and many other European nations. And then I wanted to talk about a little bit about, Shelley mentioned this book that I've done, about the man of the trees. And I like to tell this story. I wanted to tell his story because I thought it was really kind of inspiring to see what an individual could do. And this individual is named Richard St. Barr Baker. And I called him the first global environmentalist. And he grew up in England in the late part of the 19th century. And in the early part of the 20th century, he actually moved to Saskatoon, where I'm from, and went to university there and started a homestead. And he said he spent a lot of time with the indigenous people there and learned about their views of nature. And as he went back to England and decided to go to forestry school and started some amazing projects in Africa that tried to help people to overcome problems like desertification, the destruction of forests, protection of biodiversity, but way before anybody else was doing this kind of thing. So I wanted to tell his story, and one of his greatest endeavors was something called the Great Green Wall. He spent a lot of time in Kenya and in Nigeria, and he was starting in the 1920s to see the encroachment of the Sahara Desert into these, moving south into the Sahel region in Africa. And he proposed building a wall right across Africa, 7,000 kilometers long and 30 kilometers wide, as a block against the desert. And he was something of a prophet crying in the wilderness. People wouldn't listen to him about this. But about 20 years ago, this idea was brought back. And actually right now, this Great Green Wall is being built. When it's completed, and there's all kinds of problems and obstacles in the way, but work is being done on it in a number of countries. When completed, it would be the largest human artifact and would be visible from space. So kind of an exciting challenge to the desert. And Richard St. Barbaker, one of his legacies, I think, was inspiring a lot of people. So for example, this young boy, Felix Finkbeiner, he was a student in school, and his teacher asked him to write an essay on the environment. And he did some research and found out about Richard St. Barbaker, and decided not just to be an observer, but an activist. And he decided to organize children around the world to become tree planters and to promote tree planting. And his children's movement's already planted 15 billion trees. And now he's a young man, and the United Nations has transferred their tree planting program to his organization, which has taken on the idea of planting 1 trillion trees. And the thinking is there are about 3 to 4 trillion trees in the world. So we're talking about maybe a 20 to 25% increase in the number of trees that there are. And of course, trees are one of the ways we can fight climate change. So this is one of the legacies of Richard St. Barbaker. So in the work I've done as a writer, newspaper columnist, and so on, I found so many incredible stories around the world of people doing positive things. And I used to say that everything that needs to be done to make an 11 billion world just and sustainable is being done somewhere successfully already. So it's actually quite exciting what's happening. So the question is, why aren't these things being adopted universally? What's the holdup for change? And I think, in a sense, the holdup is really about disunity, which undermines action. All these isms are a problem that blocks people from working together, from humanity being united in these positive pursuits. And we get hung up on all of these things that divide us and waste our time with things like the militarism and partisanship and materialism and so on. And all these opposite values are the things we really need: equality, justice, peace, and so on, that can help us to reorient ourselves and move towards solutions to all the world's problems. And so this is really an ethical revolution we're talking about. We're talking about moving from these really destructive values, which are those below the dotted line. And we see things like the overconsumption of resources and fashions, like fashion industries, like $1 trillion industry, the militarization, more trillions of dollars being wasted on things that are essentially destructive. All of our addictions, which are incredibly significant drain on our resources, our capacities, our families, our economy. And somehow we, if we look at just the cost of all of these sort of negative things that we're involved in, it works out to about 50% of gross world product of everything we produce goes to these things which are negative. So what we really need to do is flip our value, and this would release all kinds of wealth and all kinds of capacity if our values were focused more on the transcendent, on developing our inner life, our spiritual values, our human relationships, and in an ethos of service. If we became involved in ecological restoration and meeting basic human needs, if these were our priorities instead of these other things, there is a huge amount of potential for us. So I always like this quote from Richard R. Buckminster Fuller. You can't change things by fighting the existing reality because there's so much pushback when you do that. And he says you have to build a new model that makes the old model obsolete. So that's one of the things I wanted to talk about is this new project that I've been involved in called Kweaskastasuan Wakotoin, which is a 2050 food system vision for Treaty 4 territory. And Treaty 4 is sort of the southern part of mostly Saskatchewan, but also Manitoba and part of Alberta. And a group of us wanted to build a different kind of vision of the future of this territory. This is a place that's been dominated by the colonial system. It's set up a industrial, what you might call extractive or productivist form of agriculture, which has been damaging to the landscape and also to the indigenous people in the area and others, and has all kinds of problems and contradictions. And we wanted to think about how we could create a different type of food system, and based on some of the issues that I've already been talking about. One of the core ideas is that the ultimate goal of farming is not the growing of crops, it's the cultivation and perfection of human beings. So what are we really in this world for? What's it all about? Is it simply just to create economic value? Is there a deeper purpose, which is to perfect humanity? So how could we apply that? We talked about, you can't read this, so don't worry about that. I just wanted to show you what we tried to approach was a systems approach. So if we're talking about change, we have to look at many, many different areas of change in order to bring about transformation. So we talked about change in terms of culture, diet, policies, the environment, the economy, and technology, and came up with about 140 different lines of action that would be needed to bring about the type of change we're looking at. So if we go into, for example, one of the areas, this is around pursuing cultural change, and we felt to change our system, we really needed to deeply look at our culture, which has become very materialistic, and think in a really different way. And so we became very interested in these terms in the Cree language, Wakotoin, which is about the nature of everything being related. People, they talk about two-leggeds and four-leggeds, but even the vegetable and mineral kingdom, everything being related. And Kweaskastasuan is about working together to make things right. So we're talking about a really deep spiritual and cultural renewal, and the whole processes of social transformation. And the idea that our physical environment is in a sense a reflection of our social environment. So we talk about different ways of bringing about transformation by working with individuals, communities, and institutions, working with children, youth, and families to build a kind of new culture where we have an ethos of service, and doing this through beginning just with the idea of elevating conversations, basically what we're doing tonight, and building a deep discourse in society about these things. So we're in this process now with this food system vision, and I'm happy to tell you more about it. And we were fortunate to receive the Rockefeller Foundation's award, and there's a $2 million prize, which we're sharing with 10 groups from around the world, all with very unique visions of how they can transform local and regional systems. And one of the inspirations for this vision was something called the Rui Institute, which started in Colombia in the 1970s. Very interesting process-based approach to transformation. And it's really an educational movement that's taking place all over the world about transformation through education. It's worldwide, it's grassroots. It addresses not just the material conditions, as many development processes are focused on, but also the spiritual roots of change, and operates at the local level, but gathers information from all over the world, processes it at the global level, and creates feedback loops so people can learn from everybody else's activities. And ultimately involves everybody in change. So often it's, development processes look at assisting the poor, but really if we look at some of the issues I brought up, the problem is often more the actions of the rich and the middle income people. So how can we change all of our behaviors to make the world a better place? And how can we do that working with children, youth, and adults? And it's been said that this process, and it's been found in communities where it's really developed over a long period of time and starting to involve large parts of the community, that it has the potential to disable every instrument devised by humanity over the long period of its childhood for one group to oppress another. So anyways, just a few ideas, hopefully starting the discussion. These are mostly based on my book 11, which is available online, and also this book, The Man of the Trees. I was very fortunate to have the Prince of Wales write the foreword and Jane Goodall to write the introduction. They both said The Man of the Trees was one of their heroes, and they were happy to support that. And so that is it. We could go back to, if I can get back into my Zoom. And stop sharing. Okay. And since then, I've also written another book, which is also about Richard St. Barbaker. I guess that's mirror image, but it's a children's book. So this is Richard St. Barbaker, Child of the Trees, and it's part of a series of the Changemaker series, which is about people who have done really interesting things in different fields to transform their world. And so I use another one. So this one is aimed at the, I guess, middle school or junior youth audience. So anyways, so some ideas, and hopefully we can have some discussions, see what you think of them and what your thoughts are about this kind of problems and we're facing and the type of change we might need to bring that about. I think I see JJ Verrigan there. Nice to see you again.
Hey there, Paul. I had to hit my unmute button.
Yeah.
Great to see you too. The last time I believe was at the Brilliant Cultural Center a few years back.
Yeah, it's been 2 or 3 years. Yeah.
And yeah, you
Very
had
nice
a
to
great,
see you again.
you had another wonderful presentation that you shared that I still recall and reference.
Oh, thank you. So what are your thoughts, folks?
So everybody's got muted, just to let you know, so that if you're going to speak, you're going to have to use your unmute button. Linda, do we want to go around? How would you like, you're muted right now, so you're muted, Linda.
Yeah, it might be nice just to go around alphabetically maybe and just hear what people think. I'm just really happy. This presentation was wonderful. I'll just slip that in, but
Oh, thank you.
The way the screen, rather than try to figure out everybody alphabetically, are our screens all the same? Because can we just go around? No, the screens are all different.
yeah, that's the problem.
I think it's probably easiest if you just ask each, go around, somebody uses their screen and just goes around the circle and invites people.
Okay, well, all right, we can do that. So I'll just
And-
follow my screen. And Linda, do you have any, you're up in my, you're up in the top corner. You're in #1 position.
Well, I'm not in mine. I just, this is the kind of presentation I wish everyone I knew could see. And I'm so happy to see old friends and new friends here tonight. But I wish my son, for example, who lived in Africa for a number of years, he would have really appreciated seeing this. I'm glad we've recorded it and I can share it with him. Anyway, I'm just happy that that you're here with us, Paul. I don't know why on earth you would want to leave Saskatoon in winter, but anyway, thanks for joining us.
Okay, so the next one I see is John. Did you have anything you wanted to?
I'm thinking, pass for the moment.
He's
I'm
going to
thinking.
pass and come back. And so then I come to Jennifer, and Jennifer is muted. Jennifer, did you have anything you wanted to say? Anything to add to the conversation or a question for Paul?
Not really. I'm new at this and I'm digesting and thinking and also thinking of numbers of people I'd like to share this with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Okay. And
That's
Maxine, you're next.
Thank you, Shelley. And yeah, very much appreciated. The presentation was great. And I can see that there's many table conversations that can be had with, you know, the diversity of the knowledge and the information you shared with us, Paul. One of the things, you know, that has been really talked about, especially in education in elementary schools, is the rewilding concept. And I wonder if you could, you know, share some of your thoughts on that.
Well, if you know, if it's what I'm thinking it is, I think that there's a whole movement worldwide. Actually, Richard St. Barbe Baker was one of the people that inspired it, and one of the people that started this movement called Half for the World. So there's this idea that half of the terrestrial space, at least, in the world should be set aside for natural systems. And there's a couple of different movements that are supporting this concept. And the fellow that kind of originated the idea was a youth, and he heard Richard St. Barbe Baker giving a talk. By the way, St. Barbe Baker died in 1982, so he used to do a lot of radio broadcasts and that kind of thing. And this one person heard it, was inspired, and decided to become involved in this movement, and is now promoting this idea of half for the world. So, but I know that there are many different schools who are starting to use their school grounds to create things like, you know, on a small scale, restored ecosystems or food forests, gardens, and so on, that are part of that movement. Maybe you know a little bit more about it.
No, I just wanted the perspective, you know, and you're right. We have a number of our schools doing school gardens, and one school started last year in a whole rewilding part of their playground.
Mm-hmm.
And the students are involved with that in a hands-on way.
Yeah, in Saskatoon, there were quite a few of those going on. I noticed in Molokai, they're working on a bunch of projects to try and restore ecosystems and so on as well. So I think it really is a worldwide movement. Of course, the forces to destroy natural systems are still much stronger,
Mhm.
but there's another movement emerging.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So then I come to Jean and followed by Brent.
Hi, Jean and Brent.
You're
Nice
muted.
to see you.
There you are.
Oh, nice to see you too, everybody. Yes,
Yeah.
nice to see you again, Paul, and everybody else.
Yeah, I still remember staying at your house the last time I was there.
Yes, you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
Just bring your mask.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. It's very realistic, but also very hopeful, which in 2020, I think the hopeful is really, really important.
The other day I was reading something and they talked about, well, if I could just say, imagine your screen that you're looking at right now as a graph. And at the top left-hand corner, you have disintegration going down. And in the other corner, you have the reconstruction or the integration. When those two lines meet, then we're going to have some heavy-duty changes, possibly catastrophic in nature. And then we'll start to see our way through it all.
Mm.
But those lines haven't met yet.
Mm. Yeah, the idea things are going to get worse before they get better. But yeah, I think those two processes are underway at the same time. It's very, very true. And it's the thing about hope is it's the destructive processes are so much more dramatic and visible. And so it's harder to see the constructive forces that are underway. There's a really good book out I can recommend. It's by a Canadian author, Thomas Homer Dixon. He's been a big influence on my writing, and he's got a new book out called Commanding Hope. And he really goes deeply into what hope is, what the nature of hope is, how hope actually works within the human system, in our neurology and so on, and kind of builds a case that hope not only is reasonable and makes sense, but is absolutely necessary for the transformative process to take place. So it's really quite an amazing book. And there's other books I think now out on hope as well as a virtue that really kind of helps lift us when so many negative things are happening in the world.
I'm moving to Lida. And you're muted still.
I really wanted to thank you for this presentation and also to thank everybody here that is participating, because I think in terms of hope, there's great hope in small groups of people getting together and sharing ideas and in encouraging people to inculturate those ideas into their everyday lives. In fact, I almost think at this point, that's one of the greatest things we all can do, because there is so much to be done. One of the things that resonated with me in terms of the discussion was that just what my little piece in this is, and because I'm an old girl, I'm really focusing on younger people in the community, like my kids and their social networks and their employment networks, and spreading hope to them. I think the world such as it is, if you're young and you don't have a long-term experience with resilience, I think it can feel dismal at times. So that's something just for me that I think is important, and I'm definitely going to read the books that that Paul has written, at least 2 of them at this point, and share the presentation with my kids and talk with them about it. And So that's at this point, in terms of our discussion today, that's something that really strikes me that I can do, that can make a difference.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, my wife and I are studying a book called Releasing the Power of Junior Youth. And it's we're finding it very stimulating because it sort of shows a method of working with that age group, like the kind of young adolescent group 11 to 14, or that kind of age group, who are just sort of starting to kind of formulate their own worldview and think about, where they want to go in the world, but they're sort of before they're busy having boyfriends and girlfriends and so on. There's kind of this interesting period in life, and so it's really about working with those kids and building the sense of vision about how they can develop their own potential, their own capacities, and so on, and also contribute to improving the world. So it's kind of this twofold moral purpose in life. So it might be something interesting to take a look at. And I don't know
Thank you.
what's happening in Grand Forks now with some of these programs because of COVID. Like, a lot of things are shut down, but I don't know if you have any of this junior youth groups. But anyway, it's something to take a look at.
Thank you.
Randine. Oh, sorry, it's Vicky. It's Vicky. It's Vicky next, and you're muted. There you are.
Hello. Much appreciate the positive message, Paul. And we're a part of an interfaith group. I'm in Proctor, but part of the Nelson Bay community. And over the years, as we've been working together as a group, we're seeing more and more how there needs to be a real attitudinal change to how we are in the world and how we approach our planet. And before that attitudinal change happens, we just keep doing the same old thing, But it does seem to me like there are more and more people coming on board and seeing that the old systems, aren't working. And so, I love your project that you're doing, what did you call it? That's
a food system vision.
Yeah, I mean, this exactly, like you say, there's these little projects happening everywhere, and just, this is so heartening. And one of the projects that's happened, and I don't know if it's outside the West Kootenays or not, but there's so many young people that would like to be involved in agriculture, but they can't afford the land. And then there's older people that are sitting on land, but don't have the energy or time to put it into the agriculture. And so these two groups of generations are coming together and cooperating. And we have a farm here that, the land has been, this beautiful agricultural land has been sitting, not dormant because it's, very alive and vibrant, but they're turning it into a market garden and feeding our community. I mean, this, exactly. Look at the people in the city with their rooftop gardens and their honeybees, and yeah. So thank you for your good work.
Thank you.
Hey, Laura. Oh, you're muted.
Hello, Paul. I'm with the Boundary Peace Initiative, and I appreciate your presentation. And I really appreciated the fact that you did mention that militarism is a major part of the problem that we have for the environment. Other than that, most of what you have said, I have already seen in many different aspects, because I work with environmental groups from around the world as well. I get information and hopefully I can share it. I would like to continue sharing information with you, getting information from you. So at some point, maybe I can be able to get an email or something so we can build a relationship so we can do presentations further on within our community. Because the Boundary Peace Initiative does plan on having conferences, larger conferences based on sustainable development and environmental issues, and putting a positive spin on building rather than destroying, creating, not destroying. Thank you.
Right on. I put my email in the chat box.
Okay.
So if you want to grab that, I'd be happy to continue.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Donna, if you want to unmute.
Yes, I missed your presentation the last time you were in the Kootenays, Paul, and so I'm very thankful that I was able to hear your presentation tonight. And I too agree that it's very hopeful, and I think that that's what we need in this world. There's a lot of people that I know, because I've been on Zoom a lot recently, who don't have that kind of hope. They, you know, they're bewailing the situation in the world, but they have no idea of even at the grassroots, you know, making changes. So I think this is wonderful, and I hope that I can share some of what you've talked about tonight with people in my bubble.
Thank you.
Okay, and then, oops, I go to JJ. If you have something to say, you'll have to unmute. There.
Well, thanks. To echo just comments from other folks, Paul, very informative. And yeah, it left you with a feeling of hope. So thank you for that, because there's a lot of people, and I agree with the previous speaker, Donna, because of COVID or for whatever reason, there is a lot of hopelessness. And that's compounded by everything else that people are bombarded with: misinformation, disinformation, mixed signals. This medium that we're using is a blessing and a curse. Just like this pandemic is a crisis and an opportunity. So when we're talking about use, and Grand Forks is a little bit different than the Kootenays. It's I could just remember, because from growing up here, there were times when Grand Forks seemed to be upbeat and the Kootenays were sort of slowing down. And right now the situation is reversed. And I'm not talking in the economic sense. I'm just talking in the sense of people being able to mobilize for good things. So when I appreciate your focus on use, and I think it's important that we understand that, especially for use, that hope has to be hands-on. It can't be philosophical, intellectual. It has to be something that young people could actually go and do, and we could actually go and do it with them. And the kind of cooperation that was also referenced earlier between generations. This is my third Zoominar or webinar or whatever these things are called today. So I appreciate you folks bearing with me as I'm trying to think straight here. One of the things that these were on Canadian foreign policy in light of the presidential elections down south. The second one was about the treaty to outlaw nuclear weapons, and this is the third. And it's interesting, we go from international to national to local. And so there's two themes that ran through, including Paul's presentation. One was the understanding, even from these talking heads in high office, that real transformational change can only come from the local level, the communities, because that's what provides the political will for the politicians, I guess, to harness those winds of change. So that was one thread, the value of the local community element that is often overlooked by others. The other thread was what was referred to intersectionality. And that's the peace movement, cooperating with the environmental movement, cooperating with the human rights movement, all of that cross-sectional transformation, I guess cooperation, and the imperative for it. And so they were talking about what kind of change we could expect if we're talking the results of elections, not what Paul was presenting. And basically it's very limited because of the money involved. I'm sure you've all heard how much it costs to run now down south, and no doubt lots of up here as well. And just the vested interest, you know, to get rid of weapon systems, like when Laura was speaking about the peace movement and how everybody is addicted to it because of the jobs relationship, et cetera, and the great monies involved. And this goes back to the examples Paul was sharing in terms of the local grassroots initiatives. And just in conclusion, I guess I'm in total agreement with you, Paul. I guess we can't overstress the importance of the cultural, spiritual aspects of this better world we're trying to build, rather than only the material terrestrial aspects. And that's hard to get across. So at the same time, we probably will not have a better opportunity than right now in the aftermath, as we're coming out of this COVID situation. I recall when you were in Brilliant and you were showing a presentation, and one that struck me in particular was, I believe, in Nepal, where they were doing terraced farming, and how this community had come together and they were now cooperating as a community with respect to the farming initiative. I'm not sure if you recall that presentation or that particular slide. And I thought that was so wonderful. And then I had another thought creep up into my head. And this was, I think, in the 80s. If maybe, I'm not sure about the time now. Anyways, I thought, what's it going to take for one of those farmers working on that terraced initiative to think, hey, what's it going to take for me to buy a piece of this land and get these other folks to work for me? And that's what I mean by the importance of transforming and shifting the cultural imperatives that we have to, if we're going to survive, we have to replace. We cannot go on with he who dies with the most toys wins. And somehow that cultural transformation has to begin right across the board in school. That presentation of yours that we were lucky to see tonight, that should be shown in every classroom, because that kind of stuff could inspire young people. And then it's up to guys like ourselves that are involved in this call. If we're referencing earlier, if there's an initiative and they need land, so we could provide the land, and they could bring their dreams to fruition in that proper kind of world that you're trying to share. So I talked too much. Thank you very, very much, Paul. And thanks to everybody else that was on tonight with us.
Thank you.
Did you have anything you wanted to respond to, Paul?
No, I think it's, I'm with you all the way. That's right on. And hear the rest of the folks and see what they have to say.
Okay, I'm up to Randine.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you, and nice to see you, Paul. What can I add to what everybody's already said? I enjoyed your presentation very much as well, and the positive tone of it. I'm really very encouraged by the things I see happening in the world. I think, the news always focuses on what is negative, and we hear very little good news. But I think there's so many wonderful initiatives happening in the world around change, human rights, climate action, moving away from fossil fuels. recognizing that that human rights and environmental rights have to go together and work hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And I've been watching a lot of films lately on various innovations and projects that people are doing. The local Selkirk College and the West Kootenay Eco Society just had sponsored a climate countdown TEDx conference. This climate countdown is happening all over the world, but locally there was an initiative as well. So they had some local speakers, but also a number of films about initiatives happening all over the world. And it's very encouraging, things to do with agriculture and, you know, purification of water and the recycling of water and these massive electrical converting to electric cars and so on. I mean, just so many wonderful initiatives, and also very excited to see how the youth, the next generation, are just very responsive and very involved with and very aware about human rights and the climate crisis. So I think there's a lot of reason for hope.
Thank you.
Lizanne. You're still there.
There I am. Thank you, Paul. That was a super inspirational presentation. And I'm really excited to see that you've got a book for children, because as Vicky said, I like that phrase, attitudinal change that happens when we can share ideas, big ideas, with little kids. So there is hope. Thank you.
Paul, maybe you could put in the chat the name of the book, the title of the book.
Okay, I'll do that.
And now we're up to Doris.
Good evening, everyone. I'm honored to join the Peace Cafe again tonight, and especially appreciative of Lizanne and the library for their progressive action in providing this platform. Paul, I really appreciated the clarity of the power of your expression. It's something that that is wonderful to see role modeled, and it really teaches us how to talk about these things and the vocabulary that we need, especially to talk to young people. I just found your talk very articulate, and I wanted to thank you for that. I was especially interested in the Green Wall in Africa. I found that very interesting, 30 kilometers wide, and I just wondered if that was a grassroots movement or if you knew anything more that you could speak about that. And I also wondered if the books you've talked about, especially the children's book, if it's available through Amazon or where we can actually buy it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just to start with the book, probably that's the best way to get it would be all the online bookstores. Like you're probably not going to find it in a bookstore unless they order it. But on the online bookstores you can get it. And it's also available, I believe it's available as an ebook as well. So, and then the Great Green Wall, well, when Baker envisioned it in the 1950s, he did this ecological survey of the Sahara Desert, and he drove through the Sahara Desert from one side to the other. And in my book, I talk about all the adventures that were involved in doing that. And then he circumnavigated, if that's the right word, all of the Sahara countries and talked to the leaders and tried to get them on board. And, you know, it didn't really go anywhere. but then somewhere in the idea kept popping up every once in a while, and now it's sponsored by basically a coalition of all the countries in the Sahara region, and some countries have done quite well and are making significant progress. Other ones not so much. And then there's all these, you know, how politics works, and it's very divisive and undermines a lot of positive things. So there's definitely problems with it, but it's also going ahead in a number of places, which sort of proves that it can be done. And what they are finding is that the more it becomes a grassroots initiative, the more it's picked up by, as JJ was saying, at the local community level, and it becomes part of you know, a sort of a patchwork of local communities becoming engaged in it, the more effective it is, rather than being a top-down project. But you would be able to look it up if you Googled it and find out what's happening, and you'll find some of the reporting, like most things, will be kind of negative because they look at all the problems, and other ones will be very positive because they look at all the positive things that are going on. But one interesting thing was that, and now I'm trying to remember my statistic, but in Ethiopia, which is one of the countries involved, they had a day of tree planting. I'm trying to remember how many trees they planted, but it was hundreds of millions of trees, at least. I don't want to say it was a billion because I can't remember right now. But they sort of mobilized the whole country, and I think every person was given 25 trees, and the president was out and so on. And so it was quite an exciting example of what's possible. However, I know in the news today that now Ethiopia is involved in all kinds of fighting, and instead of if they'd focus on the tree planting, they wouldn't have to fight.
Eva, we can't see you, but we can hear you if you can't put your video. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Hey, Eva.
Thank you, Paul, and I echo everything else that everybody has said about appreciating the positive aspect of what you had to say. I have a question that I'd like to ask you. I've just read recently, it was in BBC News, Indigenous people in Brazil have been getting COVID and saying this is the kind of thing that happens when you disrespect nature. And it's my understanding that COVID came out of the jungle because people were moving into the jungle. Yeah. Anyway, I just wondered if you'd like to comment somehow on Indigenous and COVID and all this.
Yeah, well, there definitely is a whole understanding of the origins of the pandemic and the COVID-19, of it coming out of wild animals. And I think it involves bats as a vector, but when you go into a natural area and disturb it and start, like the Chinese like to eat a lot of different types of animals. So they take the animals, the wild animals, and bring them to these wet markets with the other domestic animals. And so some of them did become infected. So there's a concern that as we disrupt more and more natural systems and bring out, some of the animals and so on that we don't normally associate with, that this is probably going to be the source of multiple pandemics. So a key to protecting our health is to maintain natural areas that are still there in their present condition, in a positive condition. So, I mean, I don't know a lot about it, but that's my understanding, is that's the origins of COVID. Is like a lot of diseases are coming out of associations with animals.
And like you're working with an Indigenous group right now. And, when we talk about that humanity is organic with nature, and we need to learn those virtues and those values that you were talking about to have a shift of culture. And, you know, we see some of those values and virtues already in many of the indigenous cultures. And so that as we, a lot of us are very interested in learning about decolonizing, and that's part of the process as well.
Yeah, definitely a lot of the values that are found in indigenous cultures, where people live very close to the land and have this profound relationship with the land, including a spiritual relationship with the land, has so much to teach everybody. And so in our project, we're, I guess, in Treaty 4 territory, we're really trying to, one of the aspects of the project is to build the relationship, renew the relationship between indigenous and non-indigenous people. And I'll recommend another source. I'm going to put it in the chat box. It's called Reserve 107, and it's a film. It's a film about a Mennonite community and an indigenous community, and how they started to work together to reconcile, because they had, this indigenous community had lost its land to these Mennonite farmers, like, you know, 100 years ago or something. And so the First Nations were coming back and saying, well, actually this is our land, you know, legally, and we would like to get it back. And so, you know, it created all this fear, but then the communities worked through the fear and started to dialogue together. And I just found it a very beautiful film. It's called Reserve 107. I put it in the chat box, and it's available. You can watch it online. I think it's about half an hour. Beautiful.
Thank you. That's something I'll be able to share with people that I'm involved with this.
And I hope I got the name right again.
Reconciliation.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've gone through. I'd say it's, you know, when we started doing this, we wanted to do it so that it wasn't just a conversation every month, that we would do something constructive, you know, in between. And we'd started off, a lot of our sessions were on racism. And one of the big issues, one of the main things that came out of it that we could do was really educate ourselves. And we were given some really good resources to read. And so I was interested in that award when I hadn't realized when you told me about that award that it was, you were working with an Indigenous group. And one of the books I'm reading is called 21 Things You Might Not Know About the Indian Act.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're talking about Saskatchewan, the term Indians was, the Indians were given, in order to civilize them, they were given land to become agriculturists. That was the idea, that would civilize them. It was kind of funny because they usually taught the settlers how to grow things. But the land they were given wasn't suitable for growing things, except in Saskatchewan. And the Indigenous people there became so successful that then they were a threat to the settlers. So then a pass system was introduced where they needed permission to leave the reserve land, and then they needed permission to sell their produce. And then it was against the law to sell it to white people. And they even needed to get permission to buy machinery. And that became an obstacle because they were more or less barred from using modern machinery. So when I hear about this initiative and this award that your group won, then you can see that this transformational change is taking place when you look at where that started. and interesting in Saskatchewan again, where quite a bit was written about that in the book. And I guess the other thing is, if we're having this conversation, what can we do now? Like, where can we take this? And you know, we've been given resources again that we might read. Maybe we want to have a little book club, or share some, read some of the same books together and share our thoughts. But just an idea, anyhow. Thanks, Paul. JJ wants to say something.
Yeah, not so much say, but just to ask if the book. So, Paul, you didn't bring any books with you, and I'm just wondering, is this, how can we make this slideshow available to the high school, for example? Is there a I'm not sure if there's teachers involved here, but yeah, this has to be shared. And so that was my question. How could we access and
maybe Maxine, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, we actually have taken peace cafes to the high school in regular classes and in the Global Citizenship Club. And I believe they're looking forward to a date being set sometime, in January or so with Paul, with one of these groups. So there is already some growing momentum in association with this Peace Cafe, and we're basically calling them the school Peace Cafes as kind of an offshoot of this.
And Lizanne, would you like to speak to we're recording this right now and how people can see it?
Well, hopefully it's an easier process than David Seven Deer's video, but I think it will be probably available tomorrow afternoon. I should be able to get it up onto YouTube, and you can either get that link by going to the library's events page and looking for the poster for today's presentation. And if not, I'll share it with the other folks that are busy getting Peace Cafe information out to the public.
Okay. Well, we're coming up. We've gone over time. I know people are zoomed out, but if there are any more just quick comments to finish, was that Brand? Go ahead, Brand.
Most of you are familiar with this quote. The well-being of mankind and its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. And right now, if we look across the border and we see the polarization in the States, and the governments are fighting with each other, they're paralyzed, and this is happening all over the world. Until we get that unity, we can't get this done. So I think we're going to see many changes in the governments of the world coming up because we have no choice. That's it.
Okay. Thank you. And Lizanne.
I just wanted to say that when it is up on our Facebook, or not our Facebook page, but our YouTube channel, just simply by Googling the title of this presentation, it should take you right there.
Okay. That's good to know. And I guess the only other thing I had to say is that Paul had mentioned the Ruhi Institute, and if anybody is interested in knowing any more about it and the educational materials, they are being studied in Grand Forks, and we'd be welcome to share information about it. So we're over time, but it was well worth it. And thank you
everyone. Thanks for having me and setting this up. The organizers really appreciate the opportunity to be back in Grand Forks without the snow.
You just missed it. Keep up your great work, Paul. Right on.
Yeah.
Thanks, DJ.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. Good night, everyone.
Thanks
Good
so
night.
much.
Good night.
Good night.
Sign language, I guess.